I'm recording my homily for the 13th Sunday in Ordinary Time. At least I think it is. For some reason, I always seem to forget right as I get ready to record my homilies. Anyways, I'll correct it on the title if that's not correct. I believe it's the 13th Sunday in Ordinary Time. And so my homily this week, I do take from the Gospel. And so the Gospel is a beautiful story. It's two stories woven together. It's the story of the woman with the bleeding, with the hemorrhaging. And nobody could help her. The doctors couldn't help her. Nobody could help her. And she spent all money she had. And yet she sees Jesus, but she's not at a place where she can just go up to him face to face. She has a lot of fear. Maybe because of the type of illness that she had. Maybe there was some feelings of culpability. Maybe she felt unworthy. But she could go up behind him and just touch his garment. And she had faith that he would desire to heal her, even if she was a nobody, even if she was not worthy of seeing him face to face. So you have her story woven in with the story of the synagogue official who does have the courage to be able to go to Jesus face to face. And he's going there for someone else. He's going there for his daughter who is dying. I want to talk a little bit about how the irony of injustice. And so there's lots of injustices. Perhaps the affliction this woman had was an injustice. Perhaps the fact that this synagogue official's daughter, who was 12 years old, was dying, there was some kind of an injustice there. It wasn't right. It wasn't good. And it's not that somebody did something necessarily bad, but it was just something bad that was happening. And therefore, you have this brokenness, right? You have this need for healing, this desire for healing. The irony is that in moments when we confront injustice, we have to choose. We have to choose about our faith. Whereas if everything's going perfect, we can slip and become very lukewarm, right? We can just become turned in on ourselves. When everything's going fine for everybody, at least around us, we can become very lukewarm. But when there's an injustice, all of a sudden we have to choose. And it's like, am I going to permit this injustice or am I going to fight it? And so that's the irony of how injustice actually helps us to live our faith. Now, there's two parts to injustice. There's the first when we need to be healed, right? So we need to be healed of injustice. And the injustice could be just our own sins, right? Things we've done that were bad. And so there needs to be healing. Or it could be we are victims of other people's sins. We need to be healed. Whatever it is, there's that first process. And you can see that in the gospel today with the woman, right? She needs to be healed. And she has lots of fear because of the woundedness, because of whatever is going on in her life. And so the first natural response to injustice is fear, oftentimes, when our faith is not strong, when our faith is weak. I want to give a couple examples of how that first response can not always be perfect, whether it's fear, whether it's hatred, whatever it may be. But some examples. So last week I was helping out with a vocations camp, our Quo Vadis camp. This is for teenage boys who are open to the idea of possibly being called to be a priest. And so we had 140 teenage boys, and in the midst of being with 140 teenage boys for 4 days, I think I learned why God called me to be a priest and not a parent. I'm not sure I have the patience for parenting. Anyways, nonetheless, so I was with them. And you know, most of the kids are really, really good. Most are really good. But there was a couple, I'd say 10%, who didn't really want to be there. They were just kind of disengaged. And they would often sit in the back. And you know, we took their cell phones away, so they were just antsy and not paying attention. And the kids who just didn't want to be there. And so my job was to try to keep them in line, at least somewhat, while the talks were going on. And there was one talk in particular. So Bishop Daniel Muggenberg, one of our auxiliary bishops, was there, and he was giving a fantastic talk. I mean, you know those talks where you're just totally engaged and it's like, I need to write this stuff down. Now for me as a priest, it's like, this is great homily material. So I'm standing in the back and I'm looking for a piece of paper because I didn't have my trusty little notepad with me. And I have a pen, and so I have the trash can right there, so I'm kind of digging through the trash. I hope Bishop Daniel didn't see that, but I was digging through the trash looking for a piece of paper. I found one, and so I start jotting these notes down. In fact, I got the notes still here with me, right there, right? And so I'm doing that. Now, the boy in front of me, so he's sitting in the back row, but he's right in front of me. While I'm excited and enthusiastic, he pulls his t-shirt up over his head, just to here, right? So all you see is this tuft of hair sticking up, and then he just sits there with his t-shirt pulled up over his head. At first I saw him and I'm like, what the, what would inspire someone to do that? And I, okay, he's mentally ill. No, it's like, no, he's not mentally ill. He's just a dumb teenager. Sorry, I didn't mean that. He's not mentally ill. But what was he saying? He was saying, I do not have the ability within myself to engage what is being said. And so I'm going to just let everybody know that I am completely disengaged. I didn't say he's bored. He's just disengaged. He doesn't have the ability to take in what is being said. And so in the midst, there's an injustice that's being confronted, and that's the injustice of his inability to engage something beautiful. And in some ways, by him pulling his t-shirt up over his head, it was like doing me a favor, because he was telling me, I can't absorb what's being said. I don't have the ability within me. There was some brokenness there, right? And so he wasn't even the woman. He didn't even have the desire. The injustice was even deeper for him. Now, of course, I had to, the first thing I wanted to do was just whack, but I can't do that. So I went up and, told him to pull his t-shirt down. But it was interesting because right as he did that, right as he pulled his t-shirt over his head, what Bishop Daniel was talking about? He was talking about how we become blind and deaf to things that are beautiful. And I was like, you nailed it on that one. But then he'd say, okay, there's the brokenness. It's identified. There is the brokenness, right? And so then there's the need for healing. That's the first part of dealing with injustice, the need for healing. Now, on many of my homilies, I've talked on many times about healing, about overcoming our fears, about overcoming these injustices, if you will. And so I'm not going to go into that really deeply today. But what I want to do is I want to make some connections where the injustice happens, how it becomes a gift. And it becomes a gift because we say, okay, injustice, need for healing, or I should say need for the desire for healing, need for healing. And then the second half is we become part of the team that then heals. And that connection is very, very important. But the beauty of injustice is it helps us to waken us up in that moment and say, I now need to be part of the team. Now, what do I mean by being part of the team? Pope Francis has on many occasions talked about the Catholic Church being a field hospital. A field hospital, right? Now, not just a hospital in a city, but a field hospital. So what is a field hospital? Field hospital is a hospital that they build right behind the battlefield, right? Because on the battlefield is where people are going to need healing, right? If there's a battle going on. Now, in a medical clinic in a city, you have people coming in because they have high blood pressure, and then the doctor says you need to cut back on your salt intake, stop eating bacon every morning, and things like that, or somebody's consuming too much sugar, and so they have diabetes, and all those challenges. You need to lose weight. But in a field hospital, they're not checking just blood pressure, right? This is not a dietary problem or a weight issue. This is where there's mortal wounds happening. This is where people are being harmed grievously. This is right by the battlefield. And so Pope Francis is saying we need to establish the hospital right there. So what he's saying is that it's just a given there's injustice. There's injustice in our world, whether it's physical injustice or moral injustice or whatever it is, it's there. And so the field hospital needs to be present. Now, sometimes we're the ones in the battle. Sometimes we're the ones who are victims of sin or have sinned, and so we need the healing. And so but then it's the people who are doing well, the people who are living their faith strongly, who then step in as part of the medical staff, the medics, right? And they begin to help the healing process. Now, all of that is happening by God's grace. It's all happening through the power of the Holy Spirit. But He wants us to be those instruments, okay? So, the connections. The Catholic Church is not meant to be a safe place necessarily. We're meant to be right up by the front lines, but to bring healing. That's where we're there. We're there to bring healing. You notice in war, at least I think this is how war is, that when we capture enemies, when we capture the enemy, if they're wounded, we bring them to our hospital, don't we? Right? And so even in the field of battle, even in our lives, we have these enemies, right? We have people doing really bad things. But at some point they're gonna open their heart to being healed. And that's where the field hospital needs to be ready. That's where the love of the enemy needs to be, is ready to heal even our enemies, right? I was talking with somebody the other day, and they were talking about how much they hate the fact that all these Muslims are coming into our country, and this person is Christian, right? And it was like, there's something seriously wrong here, because we're never going to desire to heal if we're just hating people. And so that's why Jesus said we must love our enemy. If we're going to be a field hospital, we have to be open to that, right? The woman in the gospel who comes to Jesus to be healed, she's still wounded, she's still struggling with fear. And so for us to recognize the fact that there's going to be people in our lives, or even ourselves, where we may desire healing, we've made some of those steps, but we're still not ready. We're still not ready to see Jesus face to face. And so I think to be very patient with people. With those teenagers, I really struggled with patience because I had expectations of them. I expected them to be open and loving what they were receiving. And there was some teenagers that just weren't there. And so to be able to be patient with that. So one of the ways the Catholic Church, I think, is patient is when you come to confession, we generally give people two options, right? You can either go face to face with a priest, or you go behind the screen, you go anonymously. And it's a temptation on my part as a priest to want people to say, hey, why are you going behind the screen? Conquer that fear. But then to be patient and say, no, some people are simply where that woman is, the woman with the hemorrhaging. Some people simply need to be able to just go up behind Jesus and just touch his garment. And so I think going behind the screen in some ways is a safer way for people to encounter Jesus. Maybe they're afraid of the priest. Maybe they've been hurt by the priest. I don't know. But saying, okay, part of this process is having this patience with people to see where they're at and then be very patient with them. Now, Jesus doesn't just let her touch his garment. What does he do? He knows that there's this person reaching out, and so he turns and starts looking for her. And so where she has reached out on this level of being very lowly, being very humble, he now wants to elevate her. He doesn't want to just let her be where she's at. He wants to honor her, the beauty of her dignity and who she is as a daughter of God. He even uses that word in the gospel. He says, daughter. And so he's using language of family. This is, you're my daughter. That must have been just incredibly powerful for her. And then he raises her up so that she can be face to face, right? So she can immediately overcome that fear and encounter Jesus' healing. Our response to the injustices in our world is often, though, fear, right? And so conquering our own fears. And that means taking our communities back in some ways from injustice. It means being, let's not be afraid to be part of that medical staff. So we go into our worlds and we attack the injustices by conquering, by by healing, by healing. You know, there's little dumb ways that we can give in to our fears. This is just a dumb example. The other day on my minivan, my engine light turned on, right? And when your engine light comes on, it's not a good sign. It means there's something wrong. But I didn't know what it was, and so I'm driving along, and I'm not seeing any smoke. The engine's not on fire. The van hasn't blown up or anything. So I figure, well, I'm going to get home, right? But the drive at that point was about half an hour. Now, from the time my engine light went on to the time I got home, in my mind, I had all these fears. You know, it's like, there's something wrong with my engine, and now I'm going to have to take my van in for who knows how long, weeks maybe. Maybe there's something really serious wrong, and that was going to destroy my whole schedule. And what was I going to do for transportation? And then I began to think about how much this is all going to cost me, you know, thousands and thousands of dollars. And so by the time I got home, I'm like resigned to the fact I'm going to have buy a new vehicle. But it was all fear. Anyway, so the next day I go to O'Reilly's, the auto parts store. I have them do the little digital test to see what the code is. And the code comes up with some vapor leak or something, and I says, so what's that? And she says, well, have you checked your gas cap? I says, no. So I go out, I look at my gas cap, the seal's all cracking, so I buy a new gas cap, put it on, blink, light goes out. All it was the gas cap. But mentally, because of the fear, because I allowed myself to go down that path of fear, I was all these horrible scenarios, and yet it was just a gas cap. It cost me $14. And so learning how to overcome our own fears like that, so that the response is something that is healthy and good rather than something negative. Now, again, the irony of injustice. So look at our country. So tomorrow is the 4th of July, celebrating Independence Day, right? Well, how did we gain independence? Because of injustice. They reached a breaking point where people who are here in the United States, or what would be the United States, they were saying there's this injustice, and we've had enough. We've had enough of the injustice, so we're going to fight back, and we're going to get our independence. Most countries that exist today at some point fought for their independence from another country. And why did that happen? Because everything was perfect? No, because of injustice. And so they reached that breaking point and said, I must act. And so that's a little clue to us that we need to be mindful of, always watching for the injustice in our world, whatever form it takes, because then we must live our faith more powerfully. We have to choose to do so. You know, in the Catholic Church, I think we've given in, and this is, I think, a mistake, we've given in to trying to make the faith more convenient, easier to follow. In fact, today you have some people who want to change the rules of the church to make them easier to follow. And they think that will attract more people. But it's actually usually the opposite. It's when we are forced to stand up against injustice, whether it's, again, moral or physical or whatever it is, that we actually live our faith more, not less. When faith is less convenient, we have to choose, right? It's interesting, they did a study and they found that many Catholics today don't go to Mass on Sunday, but if their parish in their neighborhood is going to close down, they will immediately become very vocal about opposing the attempts to close down the parish. Now, why is that? Well, they want to maintain this convenience even though they're not participating. But if it starts to become more inconvenient, then they have to choose. And I think that's actually a good thing. We need to make our Catholics choose. They need to step up, right? Because when they don't choose, they get healed, or at least they think they get healed, and then they decide not to help anybody else. It's like, great, I've been healed. Now I can just go do what I want to do. But they don't become part of the medical staff. They don't become part of the field hospital. So we need to allow them to see the injustice. So one of the things I'm talking more and more about in my homilies is the fact that it's a sin to not come to Mass on Sunday. There's an injustice being done to our community and to our faith when people don't come. And so because of that injustice, I'm trying to get them to choose. They need to choose and say, confront that injustice. Okay. That last part, making that connection, we need to overcome our fears of being part of the medical staff. If somebody says, well, I'm not equipped to help other people come to Jesus, then we need to deal with that in our own lives and say, how do I become more competent in my faith life so that I'm not narcissistic, but I can think of others, I can help others. I'm competent in my spiritual life, I'm competent in my moral life to help others, to bring goodness and light into the world, and to not be silent, and to not just go with the flow. So it's getting to that point. Now, the synagogue official in the gospel, right, he's at that point, and because he's confronting this injustice for someone who he loves, his 12-year-old daughter. It's a beautiful, powerful story. I mean, I can't even imagine, how you as parents, how you feel when you hear this story and you put yourself there. And you would say, well, yeah, I would do anything for my child. I would do anything for my child. And so when there's an injustice, the giftedness of that in forcing you then to act, right? To become part of the field hospital. And so this father was being forced to choose. Maybe before this injustice, maybe he was lukewarm like everybody else. And he wouldn't have lifted a finger for other people. But now he's being forced to. And so he goes to Jesus face to face. And so he has the courage to do that. And so now he's the ambulance, he's the paramedic, he's the one helping Jesus come and heal. All right, I think that was all I wanted to talk about today. I didn't in my homily today give very many practical examples of how to do that, but I know in my own life I'm feeling more courageous in confronting when a stranger says something, to be able to, in a loving way, to respond to it with truth, to respond to it with power, Jesus' power, and to respond to it with a desire first to heal, and then to call him forth to be part of the healing team. All right? Okay, God bless. Bye.